something else I wanted to mention was that Couchbase.NET SDK version 3.0 was just released, I believe. This is an alpha release of the .NET SDK for Couchbase. And there's some, this is a major version. This is 3.0. And there's some reasons why we're releasing a 3.0 version. So there's, we had SDK 1 that was designed for Couchbase Server 1 way back in the day. And then SDK 2 supported a lot of the new stuff that we added, like Nickel. We added full text search, analytics, etc. SDK 3 is going to be aligned with features that we're adding in Couchbase Server 6.5, which is what I'm actually using, an internal build of 6.5, and some stuff coming in Couchbase Server 7. So there's a little bit of a chicken or egg problem when you're developing an SDK. Is the server and the SDK are two different things, right? Because we have a bunch of different SDKs: a Java SDK, Python SDK, .NET SDK, etc. And so when you add new features to the server, you have to often have the SDK also change to support those new server features. And so what do you do first? Do you throw the server out there with the new features and then wait for the SDK to catch up? Or do you throw the SDK out there first with new features, try to make it backwards compatible as possible, and then have the server catch up? And so what we've done here, at least with the .NET version, is we've thrown out this alpha release of 3.0 to try to get ahead of the stuff that's coming down the pipe in Couchbase Server 6.5 and 7.0. And so one of the main things that's happening is we're adding collections to Couchbase Server 3.0, which is a pretty cool feature. But not only collections, but scopes and collections. So this is a feature for multi-tenant. You could do multi-tenant with Couchbase before, but it's a little bit of extra work. This allows you to basically create again, this is brand new stuff, so this is cutting edge. But they're more logical groups of items. And buckets are the only thing that groups items right now. But there are a limit to buckets. Buckets are not just for data organization; they're for scaling and replication. And so there's a limit on the number of buckets you can have. Right, so they're resource intensive, like it says right here, and there's a finite number of buckets. So for the stuff like we're talking microservice or multi-tenancy, that's challenging. There's some workarounds, but it's challenging. And so we're trying to solve that by adding scopes and collections. So I'm just sort of learning this stuff along with you right now. But a scope is a unit of multi-tenancy. So if you have, let's for instance, you're creating some sort of software and you're selling that software to 20, 30 different customers. Each customer could have their own Couchbase cluster, which can get expensive, especially if the customers vary in size from large to small. You could have them each have their own bucket, but now you run into a ceiling, the number of buckets you can have. So what we have now is a scope, and a scope allows collection names to be reused. So I can kind of see where this is going. So you have a bucket, and a bucket contains scopes, and then each scope can contain exactly one unique collection name. All right, so every bucket has a default scope called _default. So you don't necessarily need to worry about defining scope to begin with. And then you can have a collection. So let me just see if I can draw this out. So maybe I have a bucket called Twitch chat, which I think I do have a bucket called Twitch chat. Can I get logged out again? So here's right now I have a bucket called Twitch chat and a bucket called family photos. So I've got a Twitch chat bucket and a family photos bucket. So right now the current state is that's all I have as far as organization. I can either put a document in Twitch chat or I can put a document in family photos. But I'm limited to 10 buckets, roughly speaking, 10 buckets per cluster. So what I can do in the future state is I can have a Twitch chat, and in that I could have this is a bucket, and I could have a scope called Matthew D. Groves scope, and I could have a SQL++, which is another Twitch account I have, scope. All right, and then family photos bucket, I could have I could have like a, I don't know, just arbitrarily here, a JPEG scope and a PNG scope, right? And then inside the scope, I could have a chat collection. I could have, what else would be another example? So I could have, let's just call it message collection, and I could have a, in Calvin's case, he sent me some bits, so I could have a bits collection, and so on. And I could have the same collection inside, a collection of the same name inside SQL++ scope. So notice that the name here is the same, but because they're in different scopes, that's allowed. All right? And so I could have, in here I could have pictures would be a collection. This would be pictures would be a collection here. So again, two different collections, the same name, just different scopes. So that's how I could do it. So let's say I was working at a company Calvin's familiar with, like heuristics solutions. I could have a heuristics bucket, or in, I guess it might be a learning builder bucket. And I know that that Learning Builder has tons of customers. So like I don't know if I can say the customer's name. If that's allowed or not. They'd be happy with that. But they're all a bunch of acronyms, right? So let's just assume FBI is a customer, right? So FBI would have a scope, and CIA would have a scope, and the NSA would have a scope. So inside that, I could have a learning plan collection, and I could have a workflow collection, and I could have, what's another one? Activity collection, etc. Right? And then each one of these scopes could have that. So you can see how this would help you with multi-tenancy. You still got it. I'm going to come back. So each one of these, so if I added another customer, for instance, so I currently have the FBI, CIA, and NSA as customers. I have another customer, IEEE. They come in, and they have their own scope. So it's just IEEE data, and they would get collection for learning plan, workflow, and activity. So I could keep adding more scopes, but it's all inside of one bucket. And this bucket is where things like replication and scaling and backup policy and all kinds of things can take place. But just by adding scope, I can build this out. So if my application is connecting to the FBI scope, it's not going to affect any of the data in the CIA scope, and vice versa. All right, so I'm isolating these for a multi-tenant type of situation.